First responders know the struggle of keeping their gear fresh. Sweat, smoke, and other odors can cling to your equipment, and much of our stuff can't be thrown in the washer. Enter Arrest My Vest, an odor eliminating spray for vests, tactical gear, bunker gear, and more. Unlike other sprays that just mask odors, Arrest My Vest eliminates them at the source, leaving your gear fresh and odor-free. It's non-toxic, natural, and plant-based. There are several scents, or if you're like me, you can opt for the fragrance-free. Arrest My Vest is made in the USA and has been serving first responders across the nation with a money-back guarantee. Find it at arrestmyvest.com or on Amazon. Oftentimes, there's a lot of candidates that want to take the next step in the organization and promote. However, they find themselves at an impasse with where to start. Or they know where to start, but they know that there are so many different elements that are extremely arduous, challenging, and stressful to prepare for. I've prepared a guide because I want to help everyone, no matter what their confidence level is in public speaking or recognizing the different elements or how to show up your best way and highlight your leadership style. A lot of times those folks know exactly what it takes to be a leader because they do it at the line level. However, they are surpassed by those that simply test better, have the gift of the gab, whether or not they actually can put anything behind it, or they've taken the test so many times that they've slowly edged their way up that list and eventually may be in striking zone for a promotion. So if getting selected for the next rank is of interest to you, I highly recommend you do your homework and you recognize resources. And part of doing that homework and recognizing resources is the guide I've prepared. It hones in on a lot of my lessons learned from being on both sides of the table, testing as a sergeant. And although I got the nod in the first round, when I looked at the notes, there were a lot of things I misunderstood. There were a lot of things where I didn't present my best way. I was just fortunate that my total test score was I was fortunate that my total testing process was successful enough to get me in. And then for commander, doing that internal process and external process, seeing some dramatic differences, coming out on top of both processes. However, learning again, when I looked at the notes, there was so much that I left on the table or so much that I misrepresented myself or I didn't convey what I had intended to the assessor. So with all those lessons learned, breaking down the common test components, and also, arguably more importantly, how you identify, define, and prepare your own leadership philosophy that you can not only take into the test, but you can take into your day-to-day interactions with your team, your peers, your subordinates, and your leaders, right? Because leading up is a critical part of organizational development and culture as well. So for more on the guide, you can find it at bluegritwellness.com. That's the promotional guide at bluegritwellness.com/shop. And whether or not you are looking to promote, we all know those people that should be taking the next test that we keep nudging. And those people need to be empowered. They need to find confidence. And a lot of that can come from you just giving them that nod, giving them that support, that encouragement, and telling them where to find the guide. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tum. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Dr. Jody Carrington. Dr. Jody, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This is such an honor. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I'm stoked. This is really exciting. I as I shared with you, and you know from the get-go when we got connected, but you came up from one of the listener followers when I pitched out, who do I need to speak to about police relations, about family dynamics, and just giving resources in the correct, I suppose, conversations for police officers and first responders to think about. And I'm pretty sure it'd be so hard to find it now with all the messages, but I'm pretty sure it was like a resounding, like, Dr. Jody, like exclamation point times 3. And so I immediately reached out, and I really wasn't familiar with you, but it's been really exciting in preparation for this to look at some of your content, your show yourself. So please plug that, Unlonely, but as well as your appearances on other shows and what you put out, because they're not they're not easy conversations. And that's really the point of this is, in building better police officers and better humans, like we need to have those uncomfortable conversations, oftentimes starting with ourselves. So yeah, I could keep going, but thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me. And we had just spoke briefly as well, but it is such a love for me, the people who do this work, because I was a civilian member. So this is how I started. I don't have a background in policing in my family system. I don't,
Hmm.
but I always knew I wanted to be a psychologist. And so one of my jobs early on was I got to do an internship with the RCMP, our National Police Force, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I became a civilian member. And so I served for a couple of years, and I fell in love with the people in the organization. And I was amazed at how little support there were
Hmm.
for the people, the humans and the families committing service to serve their country and their people. And not just people, but people in their worst state. So you're actually signing up to serve the assholery-ishness of
Hmm.
humans on this planet every day,
Yeah.
and there's no place to catch you. There's not a single recognized program for first responder spouses in North America. And there's a lot of attempts by people who have done the work and it's broken their soul to interject in fixing it. So, lots of programs. It's like, okay, Wounded Warriors, which is, a brilliant organization, but there's a lot of people that are hurt trying to navigate this process. And I am amazed. So I've sat with chiefs of police across, our country. I ended up doing a PhD in police psychology and really understanding trauma and the effects on family systems. And then I did my residency in Nova Scotia, which is on the eastern
Yeah.
seaboard,
Hmm.
and I had to do rotation with kids, and it was so helpful because I started to then really understand the brain science, the neurophysiology behind emotional regulation and trauma. And then I did 10 years on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit for kids at the Alberta Children's Hospital, really starting to understand family systems dynamics and, what happens in the system. And then I met my husband and we're late because we were old. So then we had to have kids fast. And I'm not a huge fan of children, despite the fact that I was a child psychologist. So we got
Despite the
one.
fact
And
that you worked and learned everything you could about them and foundational kind of
I'm not
principles,
a
right?
fan of
And
kids. They
formation.
drive me. I wrote a best-selling book called Kids These Days. If you watch me with my own personal children, you wouldn't buy the book because it's a goddamn shit show most days. Okay.
I think
So
that's the
then,
thing. You should have learned that in your studies, right?
no, I mean, I'm better with other people's children. So are you.
That's
Like,
fair. That's fair.
this is the
Hmm.
point, right? So when I came, we ended up moving closer to my husband's mother because I think he was trying to save me. And I started private practice and serving mostly police officers. My favorite work is in the world of PTSD and, what happens when we ask people to do subhuman or superhuman things their whole
Hmm.
career and give them no place to land. So it's quite simple in my mind about what is required. And then I started speaking mostly to organizations and educators around emotional regulation and connection. I wrote a couple of books. They became national bestsellers. And over the last probably year or so, I mean, I spoke at the United Nations. I've been on the Today Show talking a lot about what, we're going to talk about today, right? If the people doing the serving aren't okay, the people they serve don't stand a chance. And historically, we look a lot to who community policing efforts are focused on who are we serving? Like, do we have enough resources for housing insecure and financially insecure? And what are we doing here? And what are we doing here? And when I ask chiefs of police, what I ask big leaders, okay, so what do you do for your police officers? What do you do for those that we're asking day in and day out and their family systems? And the answer is generally crickets, right?
Hmm.
Like, well, we do a potluck. Well, holy shit, nothing says you matter like bring your own food, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is this shift in focus of if we're going to put the most dysregulated humans in front of people every single day, you cannot defund the police. You cannot. We always need somebody to walk us home. Always. In our most significant times of distress, we will need the walkers. It's based on a Ram Dass quote that changed my life. He said this: "We are all just here walking each other home."
Mm.
The most profound walkers I've ever met in my life are police officers. The most remarkable humans I've ever met are those who have said, "Put me in when people are at their worst." And they were their heroes for their families first. And we don't look after their families.
Mm.
And then when we don't look after you, it is a breeding ground for racism. It is a breeding ground for marginalization because you serve the most dysregulated among us, which tend to be the most marginalized. So the idea of then assuming the worst about people becomes a reality in your body. And if we don't have a place to put it, it becomes debilitating to continue to serve.
Yes. Well, thank you. You covered so much ground, and you actually covered a couple points that
I saw
no,
your face. You were like, holy fuck, whose show is this?
no, I love it. I knew, and even for the listeners, before we got started, I already told Dr. Jody, I was like, there is not enough time today, and so I'm already preemptively inviting you back. But you covered a lot of points that I heard you speak on someone else's show, and I just want to cover a couple things. One is that you come from outside of the police industry, as do I. You know, I didn't grow up around policing or anything like that. I learned everything about policing through applying and then getting hired and then like doing the
Really?
thing. And so it gives me my perspective. It's not a better perspective, it's just mine. But I
Sure.
appreciate hearing that because, to be totally frank, when we have so much police scrutiny in the last several years and beyond, it makes me cringe at some of the things that I know are not rooted in hate, and I know that they're not rooted in negativity. They're cynicism and they're these coping mechanisms. But when someone that's not familiar with police, like an outsider, comes around that, I start to kind of tighten up because I'm like, I don't want them to see something that's not true, right? I don't want them to see and misinterpret what I see as coping and it's razzing the guys and gals. It's this different kind of subculture. I do find that most of the time when people are around it for a little bit, they get it. Like, you know, there's a lot of sarcastic folks like outside of policing, right? You mentioned teachers like being one of the pillars of our society, and yes, I know many teachers, closest friends and such that are teachers, and yes,
Well,
they
cops
see
often marry
stuff.
teachers
Yeah,
their
they
whole
see
life.
stuff, and they see hurt in kids and families and brokenness that they do have the same type of sarcastic and cynical mechanisms as well. But
Here's where it becomes problematic. And so I'll tell you, like, the in order to survive or do hard things, we are best equipped if we have a community to do that. And so what is so alluring, what is so sexy about police work is the camaraderie, the understanding, unlike any other profession on the planet, what it means to see people at their worst, to see humans in their most vulnerable places. And that is unique to policing beyond any other profession, particularly when we start to talk about the confidentiality of the legal side of things and
mhm,
the criminal nature and the sinister side of things. Unlike healthcare, for example, which is really probably the closest parallel when we think about ER docs, and we're all in this space of first responding. What
yeah,
adds that extra layer is the criminality component of it, right? Which means you're not only just serving humans, you tend to be serving bad guys. Okay. Sometimes. Other times you're serving people in their most vulnerable states, when you have to do an NOK, when you have to, hold a baby on the side of a road because there's been, an MVA that, ambulance is 30 minutes away. You're
yeah,
first on. All of that stuff is so unique to this profession. And in any police force that is started, there is the hierarchy, the military bureaucratic bullshit that started for a reason. And there are so many traditions, so many things that are connected, make you feel connected, that are necessary and that never, ever have to go away. This is a unique and high honor to be able to be put in a position of authority. The uniform, respecting the uniform, respecting the traditions, marching, being able to walk somebody home who has been killed in the line of duty, all of those things are necessary to keep, necessary to foster. What is remarkably difficult to maintain is the sense that you cannot see the worst of humanity and not have somewhere to put it.
right,
And
right,
sarcasm, dark humor, all those things serve you well on the surface, but there
hmm,
needs to be a deeper place to put that shit.
yeah,
Because yes, it gets me through the day to joke and be funny and all those things. Yes, that's fine. Huh? But it does nothing in terms of regulating the emotion that becomes deeper. And when the culture is embedded in this expectation that you're tough, you got it, I'm fucking fine, you're not.
yep,
And when we get to that place of believing that, when I'm talking to recruiting officers, when I'm talking to chiefs, when I'm talking to people who are, I'm like, hey, listen, let's assume that every single human who enters this work will get PTSD, because here's the definition of PTSD. When you encode enough stuff in terror, and you have nowhere to put it, it starts to affect the way you process the world. That's it. It's a psychological injury. Now, by nature of this work, most of the time you will get a psychological injury. You just will. You're not that good. You can't prep for the PTSD. You can't. And I've talked to many recruiters going like, how do we vet out the ones that are going to get PTSD? You can't, because it is so unpredictable. I don't know, Eric, if you're going to see 64 MVAs and 2 murders in your career, or if you're going to get into, homicide specific or highway specific or whatever the deal is. I can't prep you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
you don't
one
know
shift
how
is
I'm going to process each thing and what I'm going through in my home life, right? Like, I can say going to a kid call when I had a kid was very different and very differently stressful, additionally stressful than going to a kid call before I had a kid. Both were terrible. Both were
I'm in.
absolutely terrible, right?
Right? Or if you love animals and you're in a major horse pile up outside of Seattle,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things. I don't know that your dad drank. I don't know that your mama did this. I don't know. We can know those stories about people when we sort of get you in and talk a little bit about those things. But what matters the most is how I regulate the system post events. And there's no, intervention for that. So and I often say, okay, so you ask me the next question because I'll give you the answer by the end of it. But sorry, carry on. What's the
No,
next question?
you're good. Well, you were starting to say it almost sounded like there's no intervention for that. But, I have my own leanings, which is a lot of what the show's about, which is we cannot control all the things we go to. Correct, right? We don't know what we get dispatched to. We don't know what we on view. We don't know what happens to us in some of these regards. What we can handle is, how do we build grit? How do we build resilience? How do we invest in our own wellness to kind of curb those things? It's not to say you can make them go away, like these emotional, mental, physical, sometimes alongside scars. And so where do we go with that? Like, what do we do with that beyond taking care of ourselves the best we can in a circumstance, in an environment, and profession where it's extremely difficult at best to do those things in
Amen.
regularity, right?
Okay, so here I'm going to give you the neurophysiology behind it. Okay, so this is why, this is some of the things that I think if I could get a hold of every cadet or recruit or troop member from here to the end of time, this is the one thing that I would teach. Okay, there are 2 interventions at the training level. One would be this that I'm going to talk about right now,
Mm-hmm.
and second would be I want a day with your families. So if you come in as a married human, I need your spouse and if you have children. And if not, then I need your system, whatever that means, your partner, your parents, whatever is available, to do to have a conversation around trauma. And so that we're starting to equip the system to understand that we are voluntarily, or, we are agreeing to go into places where there'll be heightened emotion, period. That's it. So when I start to do some work on that in the front end, then we have a plan for not if it's going to happen, but when. And we're not taking an avoidant mentality. Let's hope it doesn't. Oh shit. Okay. No, good. You haven't had a baby call. You haven't had a suicide. Oh shit. I've had 24 of them and I'm fine. Fuck it. So it's like not if, but when.
Mm-hmm.
And it all comes back to this truth. The body keeps the score.
Yeah.
Regardless of age, race, religion, socioeconomic status, or gender identity, we all start in exactly the same place. Race is a social construct. What differentiates the healthiest to the unhealthiest is one single concept called emotional regulation. The ability to stay calm in times of distress, to make sense of big emotion. And when we talk about emotional dysregulation, I know this isn't video chatted, so I'm going to just give you the hand model of this. Okay. So just imagine this if you're driving or you're listening to this. If you're driving, don't do this. But if you pulled over and you can do this, put your hand up, put your thumb on the inside of your palm and wrap your fingers around your thumb. So now you've sort of had this fist in front of you with your thumb tucked inside, your fingers wrapped around it. Okay. If you do that, do this right now, Eric.
Doing it.
Yes. So that's a hand model of your brain. Okay. So it's about the same size of the brain that's sitting in your skull in this moment. Anatomically speaking, your arm is your spinal cord, your wrist is your brainstem. Okay. And when we're serving other people, when we are at our best and when they are at their best, their brain looks just like this. Everything's intact, ready to go, process. We have access to the best parts of ourselves. Okay. If you flip your fingers up, what you'll see inside is your thumb tucked in there. That represents your limbic system. All of us humans are born with 3 emotional regulation strategies for free. Okay, that's what I said. You need the best emotional regulation strategies. That's the healthiest among us. We all get 3 for free: fight, flight, and freeze.
Mhm.
That's tucked into the most primitive part of our brain. Your babies, my babies, everybody we know on the planet, that developed first. Okay, when we're developing in utero. What separates humans from most other mammals is the prefrontal cortex. Now, those are your fingers. So take your fingers that are shooting up right now and wrap them around your thumb that's tucked inside your palm. Those fingers, those 4 fingers, represent your prefrontal cortex. And that houses everything you've ever learned in your life. It lives right above your balls, your eyeballs, okay? And everything you've ever learned in your life lives in that prefrontal cortex. Your first childhood phone number, every 10 code that you've ever had to know, every aspect of the criminal code, how to speak any language, any tradition that you have, how to play a musical instrument. If you're a golfer, your best golf swing lives up there. The middle name to your mother-in-law lives up there. Also, how to be kind, how to take a deep breath, how to use your words. All of those things live up there, okay? And my friend Dan Siegel said, I want you to think about that like a lid. When your lid is on, you have access to the best parts of you, okay? So if you look at, if any of you listening have your own personal children, when you look at your children and you're proud of them, they're being kind to other people, you're sort of like, holy shit, this is amazing. I'm doing a good job. They're using their words, whatever it is. That's who you've raised. That's your baby. Their lid is on. They have access to everything you and everybody they love have taught them. Okay. We often don't judge our kids in that moment. We judge them when they're like, fuck you, dad. But generally speaking, that's who your baby is when their lid is on. Okay. If you've ever went on a second date in your life, you went on that second date because your prospective partner's lid was on. If you've ever heard this, she's flipped her lid. He's lost his friggin' mind. And so what I'm doing for you right now is I'm flipping my fingers up, which means I'm flipping my lid. That's the definition of emotional dysregulation. You flip your lid. Now, generally speaking, the only reason a police officer is called is because somebody's flipped their lid.
Yeah.
Nobody calls you when people are like, hey, shit, fellas, things are going good here. Do you want to just drop by for a snack?
Mm-hmm.
Huh? Nobody's been in a car accident. We're just pulled over on the side of the 402. We just wanted to know if you want to eat. Like, no. Generally speaking, people are in fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, so you're serving people in their most dysregulated. And you think about this. When you bring a baby home from the hospital, how they let you know what they need, because they don't got a lot up there yet, is they cry. They lose their friggin' minds, right? They can't say, Daddy, I'm hungry. Mommy, grandma's voice is annoying. They just cry. And the job of big people is to walk them home. Now, what we do with an infant, even if you've never held one, there's a neurobiological call in all of us, right? If you pick up a crying baby, you'll engage in a rhythmic exchange that looks like this. That is a universal response to a crying infant. If you're in Afghanistan, or you're in Australia, or you're in France, or Seattle, we all respond exactly the same way to a crying infant, even if you've never held them. Why? Because our understanding of emotional regulation is in our bones. It often happens without words. The first sound every single human on this planet felt first was this: bump, 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 the heartbeat of our mamas. And whether she's alive or you have a relationship with her or not, your understanding of emotional regulation means the physical presence of another human being to get you back to the best parts of you. Okay. And you know that when somebody's lid is flipped, you cannot reason with them. Right. Not because they don't want to, because they can't. And when we start to punish or hurt or give ultimatums, you cannot process it. And when I understand that, the neurobiology behind serving humans, I become so much more powerful, because I know my job is to, at the best of my abilities, get your lid back on. When your lid is on, you are safe, and so am I. When your lid is flipped, you are unpredictable. You're acting from a place of fear, and you've lost all access to your resources, which you should. If you you're involved in an MBA, you can't remember the number to your bank card. That you don't need to. I don't know how to take a golf swing. I'm in fight or flight. And the idea of police officers is you often end up serving people when they're in that space. So what matters most is if you get into that space, if people say you're a fucking son of a bitch, I hate you, and you lose access to the best parts of you, that's where we get into trouble.
Yes,
The issue
absolutely.
isn't the people we serve, it's the people doing the serving. How do I hang on to those people to say, here's time where you take charge? Because this is the time where you may have to shoot somebody, you may have to tase somebody, you may have to do something, because sometimes when people's lids are so flipped, when they're on a substance, when you cannot get them home and they're going to hurt somebody else, you do have to do that. You do. As parents, if I take this back to the same level, our job is to take charge when kids can't. And if we give them as much benefit of the doubt, look at me. Okay. Let's get a snack. Let's have a drink, a coffee. Come here. Come on. If I can bring you back home with all of the strategies and solutions in my bag, nobody's getting hurt. But there will be sometimes, even as a parent, when I'm like, enough, sit down, or I'm separating my twins, or I'm like, take charge moments are necessary, which is why you can never defund the police. There are some times where people will require an external source to keep them safe.
Yeah.
And so every other piece below that is the most skilled police officers I've ever met. And who tends to be better at emotional language is women. Who
Yep.
tends to be better at like, oh, come here, look at me. I know I should have another donut. Do you know where I can get a donut? Because I'd really like one right now. You're a fat pig. Why you cops are assholes? You're not wrong. I mean, I've met a few. What I'm trying to do is get their lid back. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is that I'm not condoning the behavior. I'm not supporting the behavior. I know that if I, from a neurophysiological perspective, can get you back home, you're going to be safer, and I am too. Then I teach. Then I arrest. Then I consequence, in that order. But see, we've been taught so long that you don't let people get away from anything. You don't be disrespectful. And this makes more sense, not maybe more sense, but as a parent, right? We've all been taught this way. Kids should be seen and not heard. But here's the problem. We were parented in a generation that had a set of rules created for a world that no longer exists.
Yeah.
The people you are serving today are far more dysregulated than they were a decade ago. If you've been a sworn police officer for more than a decade, you have seen a change in humans because the globe has changed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The ability to have access. It is estimated that our great-grandparents looked at their children 72% more of the time than we look at our babies today.
Wow. We should sit with that for a moment. Yeah, I'm just marinating on that, right? And we all feel it, right? Anyone that has parents or anyone who is a parent, but even outside of that, right? Your friends, you might notice it in yourself, you might notice it in somebody else. You're getting coffee, you're getting, a beer, and how many times your friend accesses their phone or is flipping it up rather than flipping it down or putting it away. We all suffer from this because you're absolutely right. It's a very different time than every time prior.
And I don't think we talk about that, right? The same training techniques are still employed at every police academy across your country and mine. We're not adapting to the fact that we are serving different humans. We all have the capacity for good. So many of us are losing access to it. And when I arm you with that knowledge, your ability to walk people home becomes remarkably more available. Context is the prerequisite for empathy. Empathy is the antidote to burnout.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. There's a few points I do want to hit on. And one of them is, the comparison of parenting. And people can totally take that the wrong way. Oftentimes there's a comparison in supervisory work and people management or leadership.
Absolutely.
Yes. But it makes sense. I think when anyone removes, again, emotion, right? We're not thinking rationally. No, but it's you are in charge. You are held to a higher standard. You're the adult, right? You're the big person. And it's not to say our subordinates are like children. It's to say that you have, by definition of your role, a higher charge. And so what your officer says, they may get away with more than what you say. And that's by design. That's okay, right? But we take it out of that. We just make it, what is our primary role? It is to take care of them. It is to guide them. It is to keep them out of trouble. It is to get good things for them so they can do their job for the people out there, right? And we are trying to build and train leaders, are we not? As far as officers in the community, they are the leaders, as you pointed out. When people are emotionally dysregulated because of all the things happening around them or to them, we come in with the training, legality, tools, weapons, physical ability, hopefully mental and emotional ability, right? That agility, so we can go in and affect it in a positive way. That is ultimately what the job is. It's right, protecting vulnerable people from dangerous things. And here we are.
Yeah. And so when we do that again and again and again, if I take it back to the people that matter most to me, which are serving members and their families, if I asked you to go into those situations again, maybe sometimes multiple times a shift, depending on where you are, you're posted, or what what your requirements are on any given day or year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you think about this, your lid is going to flip on many times, right? You pull somebody over on the side of the road, right? Already the job teaches you that, you assume nothing. You be ready for everything. And if I then go to a suicide, if I go to another untimely death, if I go to a sexual assault, all in, one shift, where do you think my lid has been most of the time?
Yeah, it's just fluttering up, right? If it
Right.
even comes down, right?
And it should, because I need you don't, in those situations, serving dysregulated people, I need you to be ready. I need you to be, you don't need to be thinking about your bank card or other things, in those moments. What we don't do a good job of is building the reintegration of the lid, giving it a place to come back into things. What was that like? Well, fuck, when I saw that kid's jammies, my son has jammies just like it. And I was like, God, I froze in that moment. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
fuck. So, okay. Because here's what's critical about it. You have to name it to tame it. And oftentimes when I leave there, or leave a really shitty stretch of calls, when I don't put it anywhere, it stays like this. And so then when I walk through my door, where's the irritability? Right? My kids are like, Daddy, 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 did you have a good day? And your wife is like, or your partner's like, let's go. You got to get to hockey practice, for the love of Jesus. Like, fuck.
Mm-hmm.
No, you want a nap, And you're like, fuck off, everybody. And they're like, what is wrong? Why is he always so mad? And there's just no place to regulate emotion. That's it. You're not always so mad. And guess what? You don't want to come through the door and be like, listen, I saw a dead baby today. And we want to protect the people we love the most, because
Yes.
we don't
Yeah.
want them to feel what's happening in our body, right? In addition to confidentiality, which, again, I have all thoughts on that. But the idea is we need somewhere to put it. And oftentimes the culture does not assume that this is a safe place, because what's the deal, right? What I often ask people, I'm like, the police officers that I have loved and taught me the most, I've said, how often do you sort of talk with each other about how amazing you are? And they're like, whoa, what are you fucking talking about? And I'm like, really? Like, when you have walked a kid home, when you have had to sit and hold a parent who just knows their baby's not coming home from Christmas, what happens when you spent that extra time at the scene with the elderly woman who got in the fender bender and just couldn't breathe? Do you ever talk about those times, back at the station, back at, when you get in the car? Oh, fuck no. And that's often the question. And maybe this is different for you, and I hope it's different for people listening to this. I hope they're like, she has no idea what she's talking about. But I'm going to garner a guess that I do. Because the vast majority of the time in my work with police officers, I often say to this, tell me a time where you changed a life. Tell me a time when they were lucky because you were there.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want to know how hard it is to get people like you to tell me things like that? And when you do, what happens is I reconnect this and this. The lid comes back on and we start to process. Not all of this, because when your lid is flipped, your shoulders are up. I'm showing you this, okay?
Yeah.
Uncertainty, fear, no end in sight. That is the most dysregulating among us. Those three ingredients. Uncertainty, fear, no end in sight. That's the definition of police work.
Right.
Uncertainty, fear, and are we ever going to fucking make a dent in this? You're not. That's not your job. You
Yeah.
will not eradicate mental health issues in your career. You will not eradicate homelessness. You're not that fucking good.
Yeah,
Huh?
it's a surrender of ego, and it's so common. So many of us come into first responder work, military services, all these things because we want to change the world. When people come in as young men and women and they say like, I want to make a difference. They're absolutely right. They're not lying. That's really how they feel. That's how I felt, right? And that's where the first couple years, depending on the volume and the amount of trauma you're exposed to, that's a rude awakening for many
Oh
of
God.
us. And that's
But
where
it,
I think we're at our most cynical at times, is that quick realization that like the world is not what you thought it was.
Oh, buddy. And here's the thing, like, if you only knew, I would say this, like, if I had access to your partner, if I had, if I were to say to you, give me the time, tell me about a kid that was lucky to have you on a call.
Yeah.
Tell me about an MVA that, a death notification. Tell me about a time. And I can see in your face, you can bring up any one of those situations, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I- If you can think about them right now, those families, those humans think about you 10 times as much.
Mm.
If you only knew. This is holy work. And we do not talk about it enough. If I think about the people who, were at the side of the road when I got in an MBA with my mother-in-law, when I think about the paramedics that came the day we found out, my mom had a brain tumor, if I can think about the day that, my baby had, he had to go to the NICU, and I had all of, the police officers showed up first. I love that man, and he never knew it.
Yeah. And I think that's where you talk so much about empathy, and that's what we really need to focus on, right? And I was listening to a little adage about empathy, and it was not an uncommon phrase, right? It was just, hey, recognize the people you come into contact with. And this was not a first responder platform or anything, right? It was just someone saying, hey, let's think positively. Everyone's going through stuff. You and I are going through stuff. And when we have a negative encounter, let's assume that they're going through stuff, or let's recognize that they're probably, the likelihood of them going through something is pretty high, and just give some grace, right? Give some patience. And the flip I have for first responders is that we don't have to assume. With our peers, we know we're all going through a lot, right? This is not an easy thing to navigate in life. And then, not beyond the home life, right? You have all these things that you're literally faced with at work, right? So you actually know these things about your peers that you're oftentimes so hard on, or maybe toxic around, or vice versa, right? We eat our own in these ways. At the same time, to your point, where we started and where we keep revisiting, is that we recognize in our work, by virtue of our work, we are interacting with people at their worst circumstance, right? They're calling you because things have gotten way out of hand, and that's when you're here. And so I think that we should amend a lot, basically every oral board question, or maybe the follow up, which is not why do you want to do this job? It's like, why do you want to help people when they don't want you there, and potentially they're at their worst? You are seeing them at your worst, and what do you bring to the table to help people through their absolute guttural worst? And I think that people would really have to sit on that and think about it, and the right candidates would have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's brilliant. And I think if I were to offer you anything, the question for me isn't about, like, do you just need to be doing better or give yourself more grace? I think this also means two things. If I were to set the new set of rules, it would sound like this: be kind and don't tolerate bullshit, in that order. And oftentimes we've been trained the exact opposite. You show me you're ready, and then I'll be kind. You demonstrate your, it's the idea of, like, what, to your point, I don't think we're in a mental health crisis right now. We are in an understandable human response to a loneliness epidemic.
Mm.
We are neurobiologically wired for connection. We will not automate that, no matter how much AI comes into place. If you understand, the only AI that will ever matter is authentic interaction. The only AI that will ever matter is authentic interaction. It doesn't mean you don't keep yourself safe or somebody else safe. It doesn't mean you give commands to settle down. But you can't tell anybody how to calm down. You got to show. And when you understand that, you go home at the end of a shift knowing you gave them everything you got, and you're going to go home to the people that matter the most. Because you will not make a massive dent in this world, but you will change lives every single day. It is the holiest calling on the planet.
And I think what you said right there, it just heightens the importance of discussion of de-escalation, right? And I love how you explained sometimes you don't have that option, right? Sometimes there are those circumstances where their lid is flipped and it's stuck open. But we
No,
got to
that's my
exhaust
job
other
then.
things. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right?
And then
Like, you take charge moments. Those are those ones, right?
yeah,
Those take charge moments, which, relatively speaking, happen in a very small percentage compared to all of the times where you have an opportunity to do the walking,
mhm,
right? That, coupled with the fact that people have never been this assholery-ish, means we need to double down on the support and understanding of those doing the serving, which is why I would dramatically switch any support that I would be giving to a community in this moment and pour it into the caregivers.
Hmm.
I would want, there's 3 interventions that I would do if I ever got to work with, when I get to work with police forces. Here's always my recommendation. Number 1, I want to take a look at your training. And I would intervene in 2 ways very quickly. A program for spouses, a 1-day program. Now that took so long, so I just created a course called Hello Hero. So anybody can access it. It's for first responders and their families. But that's all you need is a 1-day thing where we talk about the brain and neuroscience and what happens all the time and how you talk to your kids about the job that daddy or mommy does. Because this is a family commitment. Everybody knows when your dad's a police officer. Everybody know, even if you live in a big city, we know, huh? No, we can't smoke a joint in our house tonight because dad's off shift. And, like this impacts the whole system. Your partners can't go out and just get shit faced at the hockey rink because there is that expectation of, professionalism that everybody has to uphold. So this is a commitment for everybody. So when I'm asking you to do that as a family system, I better support you as a family system. And we generally aren't there yet. Okay. So at the recruiting side of things, at the cadet or the troop or whatever you call it with respect to your organization, I think there needs a 1-day intervention, conversation, psychoeducation for your family system, and then a big conversation around the neurophysiology of trauma and what that feels like in your body, what it'll look like in your colleagues, and that it is simply a psychological injury, not a mental illness. So once that is set on board, then the next intervention for me in our ongoing organizations is to then figure out how we do that for serving members that may or may not be in a state of heightened arousal or struggling through PTSD already. What does that look like in terms of education and support in a way that doesn't feel confrontational or everybody has to do a debrief after every major incident. Like you can't blanket shit like that.
Yeah.
So
it backfires in some ways. And we
God.
didn't intend to do it, but we were just more, I suppose, attuned to some of these factors when we built up some of our critical incident stress debriefs, where after a little bit, people were like, no, I'm really good. I'm really good. I know that that's what I'm supposed to say, but I'm really good. And we trusted him and I believed him. And it really was that, I suppose, overcorrection that we often do in larger organizations, right? But it takes time, right? It takes that work and that process to find the right balance, and everyone's different too, right?
Well, I think everyone is different, but there is a really big understanding that as from at a human level, you cannot do this alone, and we are only becoming more isolated. We can do more work from the PC or the car or whatever you want to, your cruiser, whatever you call it. You don't even have to come in. One generation. If our fathers served in police forces, they at the end of shift, they would have to come in and face each other. They'd be in smaller task forces.
Yes,
They would talk about it. They would do a handoff. Sometimes I'm just typing shit into a computer and I don't even have to come in.
Right.
In
we
our
talked
bigger
about that.
organization.
We went through the changes of going to take home cars. And so you do start your day from the station, but if something happens, you don't. Right. And then you could come in to turn in your stuff, but oftentimes you don't have to. So you lose that kind of locker room camaraderie. And some of my earliest shifts, we'd actually stay up to 20, 30 minutes, unless someone's like, hey, no, seriously, go home. I have like an hour and a half of evidence to process and all that. But oftentimes someone would help, right? So they could get home faster. And really the overtime's, you split it and half's the time, whatever. But the point is, like, people had that, no, we go home together. And you don't have that now. And I think that there are so many challenges because of the days.
Exactly. And we were never meant to do any of this alone. So then we go home and we feel justified to sink into social media or something that does not involve, like after I serve the children of Alberta and I've sat with 6 police officers and my head is full of people I fucking hate everybody on this planet. You know who the last people I want to come home to is? My children. My husband. I don't want to frolic and play a board game. I want to watch like Dateline by myself do you know what I mean? I feel like I've earned that.
Not on Dateline, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
But further isolation. And typically speaking, people who do this work, like you, like me, we are not placated by a Hallmark movie. We're stepping into like the Murdaugh murders or Jean Benet Ramsey's murder. That's what we're watching. And so then you've been heightened all day. You've got an Apple Watch, so everything's dinging. Team snap because you coach 57 things. All the bitches are going mad here. And then your email's going off. And then the radio. Every time you get a ding, every time you get a cortisol spikes. So all day long, huh? And then we think this is your off shift. Fuck that. Guess what? People can get you anytime they want now.
Yeah.
Email, phone. Our dads didn't have that. Our mamas didn't have that. That is one generation. My dad would come through the door. Nobody could get him. It may be called the house phone, but we decided nobody would answer that during dinner.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But our bodies keep the score.
Mm-hmm.
We charge our phones by our beds. Before you even pee, you're checking that thing.
Yep.
To get ahead of the game. Maybe there's an email in there from the sergeant. Maybe I want to make sure I'm doing okay. Oh, this complainant, I asked her to get this. Okay, good. Yep, good. But you're in there going like, oh, fuck off. Yo, bitch. I don't know if you're saying those things, but maybe.
It's like damage control. Yeah. So I think a lot of people, especially non-patrol or their supervisors, or they have some administrative aspect or casework, right? It's the Sunday scaries, right? That a lot of people in corporate life can relate to, but you try to curb it, but really you're taken right there. And many
Where's our
times
break?
I've been there. Yeah. Like checking
Where
my
does
email.
the body go like, I am safe?
Yeah.
Because that's where you process stuff when you believe you're safe. As a police officer, you typically don't believe you're safe anywhere. Okay. You sit your back to the wall or to the door. You're often in this heightened state because you've been trained to be that nobody's safe. You know, your kids' friends are coming over and they unload the dishwasher. You're like, that's a fuck. He's casing the joint. Get that fucker out of here. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I cannot tell you, and you know this better than me, but the multiple conversations I've had over the years with like, is that really you? Okay. Let's think about this one more time, right? But when you're in a half flip lid most of your time, when your shoulders are out like this, and in this last decade, we've now introduced the idea that you don't get a break unless you do it on purpose. And we're very driven in this organization. Yeah, there's people that there's still the hierarchy. The military mindset is still very much in there. You don't slow down. Everything's perfect. You go harder, faster, bigger. You got it. You want to promote? Fuck right. Until you don't. And then you do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's actually tough. And I think that with my own culture and certain other cultures, I see that there is a heightened conversation of wellness. I mean, I'm all for it. However, I feel like, and I've said this a couple times different ways, but I feel like all the wrong people are hearing the wellness message of take your time. Like, you know, you don't jump up for every call that comes up. Does that make sense? Right? Like it's the hard truth that, you know, there's people that are, you know, they're slinging cases and they're doing more than their fair share. I want to grab them and be like, I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
You over there, not you,
Exactly.
not you. Like you're doing fine. You're not burning out. Right.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's really a hard thing. And I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but hopefully all the things that Dr. Jody mentioned, hopefully there's enough of them that you're like, okay, I'm working on that. Right. Hopefully, whether it's watching stressful TV or your Apple Watch, like I refuse so far to get a smartwatch because of that. I already have enough issues with boundaries and my tech and devices. Right. So like, I need to not do that.
You're so smart about that. And so much of this has to be done on purpose, because if we look at, for example, John Haidt's work, he's written a book called The Anxious Generation, talking about, you know, the group of people that we are policing or we're serving in this moment. Okay. So they've never been this sleep deprived. They've never been this attention fragmented, and they've never been this addictive. Okay. So policing somebody like that who has never been this jumpy will make our job more difficult. Okay. Or your job more difficult. What is also true is us and our colleagues have never had this much access to information. People have never had this much access to us, and our bodies have never felt this unsafe. So if I put you in this place all day that suggests the world isn't safe, if I, on your off time of not doing things like, listen, you can drink all the kale and lift all the weights you want. If you're doing that with your shoulders up around your ears, it's a waste of time. Yeah. So here's the one thing I want you to think about right now, if you're listening to me, okay? Drop your shoulders. If you feel safe enough to do this, I want you to relax your jaw, drop your tongue from the roof of your mouth. The most primitive response to stress is you slam your tongue to the roof of your mouth. The second you hear a call on a radio, The second you get an email buzz, all of those things subconsciously, we are prepping for historically what would have been a tiger,
Yeah.
a threat of some sort. Okay. Our bodies still do that. It goes like this,
Yeah.
slams
What do
that.
we do when we're about to be in a fight, right? Like think about the boxing stance, right? You tuck your
Exactly.
chin, your shoulders are up so you don't expose your neck, you don't get concussed, right? Like all these
Your
things.
jaw is tight. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we on purpose do this. All I want you to think about is every time between now and let's say the next 6 weeks, I want you to just write this word shoulders on a little note, put it on your computer screen, put it on in your phone if you don't want anybody to see it, put it on your bathroom mirror in your car. Every time you see that word, I want you to drop them. Every time before you go to bed at night, I want you to think about this podcast. I want you to know that you'll be processing your day, but I want you to consciously do that by dropping your jaw, relaxing your tongue. You will fall asleep quicker. Oftentimes what I do, when I speak all over the world, and when we do this part of getting people to drop their shoulders and relax their jaw, wiggle their toes and let your gut out. Those 4 things ensure that we get you in a relaxed body, even if it's for a few seconds. And what happens in that moment is that you might get tired because generally speaking, we don't ever relax fully.
Mm-hmm.
And so people say this to me all the time. I don't know if you've heard about this, right? But people work their asses off their whole year, life. They retire and then they just fucking die.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or you go on a vacation and it's like day 5 before you actually are sleeping through the night. And then you're mad because you got to go home the next day anyway. So you're like, fuck it, why did we come? Because the body keeps the score. The best book on trauma is Bessel van der Kolk's work.
Yep.
Gabor has also done some great things, but it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And it is complex and heady, but his main focus is unless you can feel safe in your own body, it will be difficult to process all the stuff that you do for other people.
Mm-hmm.
So you become our number one priority.
Yeah, that's huge. And I appreciate not just the whirlwind of information we received. And I encourage people to listen back and look at some of Dr. Jody's other work, but that tangible thing, right, which is to recognize that stress, how it's manifesting and what we can do to process some of it. And it's not just hard charging through, right? A lot of us have sleep issues in our career. We dabble them, right? And it's the over cortisol and it's maybe even cortisol addiction, right? Especially if we're watching, these really stressful, shows about fighting terror and, all this like medieval backstabbing and all that, right? It's, you never really let it go. And then also something that we talk about enough is whether we feel effective at home. And if we feel ineffective because we keep pissing everybody off, are we just going to work and we're diving back into the fire? And then there's the work out in the street, which we know and we talked about, but there's also the work in the building where do we feel safe, right? Do we feel like we're receiving those ultimatums from our bosses where because we forgot stuff, now we're bad people, we're bad officers, right? And so it is to have everyone think, I suppose, holistically about how these conversations translate all aspects of our lives and how we can slowly, right, like give yourself some grace, but start recognizing the things you can do, which is like I heard a lot of conversation. Talk to somebody, take moments, remind yourself that you can take a breath, right? Pause. And everyone has an opportunity to do that. Maybe it's not at work, maybe it's not at home, maybe it's in the garage before you enter the house, right? Maybe you just take that moment, close your eyes for a sec, take the little things, right? And build these small habits.
And I think what I would offer more than anything is, wherever you are, however long you've been in this business, I hope if even for a second, how phenomenal you are, how many people think about you, are appreciative of you, people you will never ever see again, people you've known for 5 minutes, the worst 5 minutes of their life. You're woven into their trajectory. It is absolute holy work. And if you're a spouse listening to this, know that if you could have seen the number of times that the one you love the most has walked other people home, you know them. They were your hero first, and they've done that for so many people. And our job is to figure out how we stay connected, how we stay regulated enough to bring them home. And oftentimes, we can't do that alone. It is not the sole responsibility of one spouse. It is building the village of their best friends, their uncles, their hockey coaches, their, supervisors. They're the ones that they love the most, right? Because typically speaking, they pull away from partners because they don't want them to hurt. The intention is good. The perception is they're shutting down. But there's so much more to say about that. And I mean, I wrote a little bit about it in Feeling Seen. That's the last book because I just really wanted the world to know about policing. And I didn't want to write a police specific book because police generally don't. It's better if I give videos. So then I did the Hello Hero. And I mean, for the rest of my career, I will focus so much on this profession because I'm so in awe of you, Eric, that you're doing this for. I can tell you love this work, and I can tell you love the people who do it more. So it was an honor to sit with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jody. Can you please let the audience know where they can find you, your show, your books, your work?
Yeah, drjodycarrington.com is where everything lives. My podcast is called Unlonely, and we talk a lot about those things there. So everything you need will be there. I would love your community, Eric, to be a part of mine.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for your time, your passion, and what you do for not just our industry and community, but the community, the capital C community, which is really what we're all about. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.